Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 26th of September 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Girish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We will be joined by live video Skype link by Dr. Graham Downing, who's going to be talking about matters related to health, but also I think there's some interesting travel restrictions coming in, which we're going to take a look at. Well, the weather interesting over the weekend, because here in Plymouth at least we had an enjoyable day on Saturday until the gale struck. I'm not sure anybody warned about that, but I take it that it was an unexpected patch of global warming crept in there. Sorry, climate change, isn't it? Of course, crept in. And today we've got a little bit of everything. So it's pretty wet in Wales. It's sunny in Norfolk. It's a little bit overcast and drizzly. It's obviously Monday. Yes. Drizzly in London. Well, where should we start? War and death? Syria, probably.
Syria, yes. What do we say? They're getting desperate, Brian. The desperation is palpable as the Russians and the Syrians deal with eastern Aleppo. And this was the rhetoric from the UK's ambassador to the United Nations, Matthew Rycroft. He said it's difficult to deny that Russia is partnering with the Syrian regime to carry out war crimes. Pretty strong language. He said the Assad regime and Russia are reducing Aleppo to rubble. Aleppo's inhabitants are ordinary Syrians who have suffered so much for so long. But of course, the eastern part of Aleppo that we're talking about here are not ordinary Syrians. There are some ordinary Syrians there, but a large proportion of them, if not most, are ISIS, Al-Nusra Front, Arar al-Sham, and a host of other tame terrorists that Matthew Rycroft likes to support. And he went on to say they are now facing an unprecedented, unrelenting onslaught of cruelty, and it's increasingly clear that it is an onslaught beyond the capabilities of the Syrian Air Force alone. Bunker-busting bombs and so on. The language is incredible. Then we had a joint statement from the Foreign Office, and in fact this came from a number of European countries as well as the UK, and they said that we've got to save our terrorists. We've got to. Let's not forget that Assad's regime, supported by Russia, have killed far more civilians than Daesh and al-Nusra put together, is the implication. Well, that's only if you define a civilian as someone who's carrying a gun, who happens to be not affiliated with the Syrian military.
It's outrageous. Like you listen to what is being pushed out by the British government at the moment. Complete and utter lies and propaganda, and of course, no real truth coming out about what's happening in Syria from our illustrious BBC and other so-called mainstream sources.
Absolutely. Well, we'll come on to that in a second, but you're absolutely right. Now, the joint statement went on to say that they reaffirm their commitment to the destruction of Daesh in Syria and Iraq, and urge Russia to follow through on its pledge to actually focus on this group. So they want Russia to focus on one particular group. Will not worry that al-Nusra is acknowledged by everybody to be a terrorist organization. Arar al-Sham the same. But we've got to focus on one particular group.
Well, we'll be able to demonstrate in a minute, Mike, that of course we can't focus on one particular group, because apparently, despite a £2 billion expenditure on GCHQ and MI6 and Britain's so-called intelligence services, they clearly don't know who is who or what is what. So that's going to be pretty easy to take apart.
But we do have to highlight the BBC today for this. Get on to today's Today program, and the URL for that is there. And if you fast forward through until about 2 hours, 40 minutes or so, you will hear a fantastic piece of propaganda from eastern Aleppo, allegedly from an English teacher who's living in eastern Aleppo. And personally, my assessment of it is that it was recorded at White City, because it was clearly, to my mind, clearly manufactured somewhere outside of Aleppo. Each section of it was supposed to be an audio diary, day by day, from this person, and each section of it had a slightly different tonal equalization on it to make it appear as if it's being recorded on different microphones from different places at different times. It didn't convince me.
Yeah, all recorded under very difficult circumstances. Well, over the weekend, I was forced to tweet out this because this gentleman, George Osborne, had come out and he said Britain and the West fueled ISIS by failing to act against Assad in Syria in 2011. And I put that in juxtaposition with, of course, the statement that the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee had said that, well, actually, ISIS was fueled by David Cameron's disastrous policy in Libya. So Cameron helps to create ISIS by destroying Libya, and Osborne says that ISIS is fueled by not attacking and destroying Syria.
Right.
So it seems to me that at the moment they are utterly desperate, Mike. The propaganda isn't working. People are seeing through this. They don't know what they're doing, hence the panic. We've got to save our terrorists. But this is where it starts to get really dirty and very, very serious, because the Mail today is carrying a story that the RAF drone pilots who were involved in a devastating attack in Syria, which killed 62 government soldiers and led to claims that UK helped the Americans effectively breach the country's ceasefire, will be cleared by an official report. Just hold that on screen, Theo, while we comment on this, because of course we can say, well, if these men were told to fly these drones to a particular location and attack, that was the order that they were given. They had no way of knowing whether that order was correct or not. They had to take it as correct. So we can say, well, okay, we can accept in this case that these people flew the drones. The result was that 62 Syrian government soldiers were unlawfully killed. But there's something much darker going on here, because if we follow this through, what we've actually got is the British government approving remote mass murder in sovereign states. Now, this is a complete violation to international law. And let's see how we can put these pieces together. So the first thing is to take a look at who's flying the drones. And this brings us straight into the Royal Air Force. This is part of the raf.mod.uk webpage. The critical, even battle-winning importance of a robust, versatile information, surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance capability continues to push the Air Force into the exploitation of new technology, new airframes, and evolving tactics. So this is the organisation, ISTAR, and it says that targets are identified by, quote, intelligence, Mike. So this is all high tech. This is all, we're moving into a new area of technology, and trust us because we're all intelligent. Well, let's have a look at this one. This is another page from the RAF website. Encourage people to go and see this yourselves. And it says, as highlighted in the Strategic Defence Review, the likelihood of conflict involving non-state or failed state actors has been increased by globalisation. State-on-state conflict is likely to change in character, and on it goes. But really, all we're interested in is this statement. The British government is now judging whether it feels overseas governments have failed. And if David Cameron or Tony Blair feel that you failed to run your country to a sufficient standard, they label you failed state actors, and then they can attack you remotely. Well, of course, think what that means. Think of the condition of Britain at the moment. Virtually nothing works, from the NHS to education. We have people sleeping rough, people who can't feed themselves. We're producing armaments for vicious overseas dictators. And yet, apparently, we are the country that's going to be judging failed state actors. So the RAF is now aware of what they did the first time round. Any subsequent repeats of this means that the people flying the drones will be guilty of war crimes. So let's bring in the boss, Air Commodore Dean Andrew. And this was his comment on the drone killing, relying on several different sources. that a checked and cross-checked means there is a strong corroboration which leaves little room for single stream failure. Now, if you understand that language, basically what he's doing is departing from reality by praising a cross-check system that clearly failed. There's no other explanation for this. He's boasting about a system which he says, well, this is a really good system, but actually that system failed, and he didn't comment on it. So what sort of man is he? Well, we found this excellent article, Second Line of Defence, and here's the Commodore boasting about transforming the Royal Air Force I-Star force, a discussion with Air Commodore Dean Andrew. So let's bring him in. Here he is. And part of his talk, this is one slide from it, is what does good look like? And if you read through this slide, and you can freeze this on screen, of course, you will find that he's using the language of change and transformation. This could have come out of Boots the Chemist or perhaps a BP advert. And I'm going to say the more you read it, the more you realise something is wrong. So what might be wrong with this man? Well, it's newspeak. And here we are. I need to have people coming into the force who already have their aperture open and can drive change. And he stressed that you should have your aperture open if you come into the RAF. The overlapping Venn diagrams that we start to see across the RAF and defence, if we use an I-Star contributing capability lens, get bigger and more complex as new and legacy platforms and services become integrated. Now, this is dangerous language. This says this man has been reframed. He's no longer able to function as an individual applying proper intelligence and common sense. Making the financial and conceptual space for that enhancement requires a common approach to training, manpower support and sustainability, information and operating concepts that is at the heart of the transformation. This is complete rubbish, and it's dangerous rubbish. And the last one, cultural change, where the aperture is opened for the team and they can embrace greater integration. So what we've got here is a highly framed individual who operates the RAF men and women who've now killed unlawfully 62 minimum Syrian government troops. He's unable to realise what he's done. He's unable to realise the significance and the danger of it. And he's wrapped up in newspeak language. And he's not alone, is he, Mike?
No. Graham, I realise this isn't necessarily your field, but have you got any thoughts on what we've covered?
Hi, Mike. Hi, Brian. Well, I mean, geopolitics isn't my field, as you rightly say, but anyone can see that the use of our troops in anything that really isn't related to proper defence of this country is really, it shouldn't be condoned. And I think you're right. I think lots of these people that are involved in these positions now, they appear to be compromised. And you see this, across the board in many areas where people end up, they have to speak the language and they have to say the things they're supposed to say, and any kind of critical thinking is lost. I mean, the use of our military to involved in anything that might result in the deaths of civilians unnecessarily and more for political gain than it is for any proper defence, and that has to be widely condemned. And myself as a lay person in this, really not an expert, I mean, it's pretty obvious to see that is going on now. And I think you've only got to kind of go onto the social media on Facebook to really see that people are kind of switching off the mainstream news now, and they're pretty well informed that this stuff goes on, and I don't think anyone could be happy with it.
Indeed. Thanks for that. Right. Just before we come on to your stuff, we shall discuss policing, because Brandon Lewis, our favourite policing minister, was speaking. He was speaking at the Excellence in Policing conference. And he said, I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you today, particularly here at the College of Policing. Providing leadership for the sector on standards, on professionalism, on diversity, and on performance is our focus today. You will have heard a consistent message over the last 6 years talking about the reform of policing and I know many of you will have played your role in delivering radical changes, including direct democratic accountability. He's talking about the police and crime commissioners, the introduction of the College of Policing itself as the professional body for everyone in policing. He lauded the cutting through of bureaucracy and stripping away of national targets, collaboration between forces, and opening up policing to the brightest and the best, developing the talent in policing and bringing in new skills and expertise at the same time. So we're going to focus on that a little bit because this comes back to the training aspect and the transformational aspect. And of course, recently we have seen how the police are behaving on our streets increasingly. And this incredible video of this policeman trying to kick in the windows of this car, and there were a couple of incidents involving the same man, but we've seen this type of behaviour before from the police, so then you've got to ask what is going on. Well, let's go back to Brandon Lewis. He said that workplace reform is improving the attractiveness of policing as a profession, and new recruitment initiatives like direct entry and Police Now are widening the talent pool and range of prior experience available to policing. Well, that's very interesting. I thought, let's have a look at a couple of these or one of these organisations. So I just chose Police Now. And here is the Police Now website, and here are the two founding members of Police Now. And I want to focus particularly on Tor Garnett. It says there, Tor joined the Met as a police constable in 2008. She's worked in a range of departments, from response team, domestic abuse investigation team, and so on, and she's now working as a detective chief inspector in the Met's Counterterrorism Command, SO15. I discovered this document here, the Review of Police Leadership and Training, and this was created in 2010, and this was Theresa May's commissioning letter whenever she was Home Secretary, 2010. And she's telling us what a great thing transformation is, what a great thing leadership is. She's using all the common purpose language. And as we go through this document, we discover that a police constable called Tor Garnett was part of the working group doing this work on transformation and police leadership and so on. As we scan on through the document, we discover that who's involved amongst the organisations that are providing evidence, but common purpose themselves.
The organisation that was harbouring paedophiles and not taking any action.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Tor Garnett then was still a police constable in 2010 when she took part in this pretty high-level review. And then here we are 5 or 6 years later, and she's a detective chief inspector. So that's quite a rise through the ranks. Of course, if we go back to what Brandon Lewis was saying about policing, he's saying that the Home Office's approach is underpinned by a belief that lasting transformation can only be successful if it's genuinely police-led. But of course, it's not genuinely police-led because organisations like Common Purpose, the CBI, the paedophile protector herself, Sarah Thornton, who was Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police at the time, and another Common Purpose graduate, we should note, the College of Social Work, which itself is infested with common purpose. These people are all providing policy proposals into the transformation of the police. And so to Brandon Lewis, I'm going to say it's hardly surprising that we see the type of behaviour that we've seen from the police in recent months and years, when we've got this type of ideology being pumped into the police, and when this type of ideology, of course, is running organisations that are recruiting and fast-tracking people into the police. So when people can become police constables and within 5 years be detective chief inspectors, there's clearly a fast-track process going on there. Police Now, common purpose-related organisation, perhaps.
And we end up ultimately, Mike, with people who have been mentally reframed and they're unable to think properly. So what was going on in that young constable's mind as he's trying to bash his way through the car window? He looked dangerous. That man looked dangerous, aggressive and dangerous. If the same behaviour had been shown by a member of the public, they'd have been tasered and probably killed in a police cell.
Okay, Graham, let's get to you now then. So you sent me this parent mail. So somebody had received this from their primary school, describing a school nurse drop-in clinic. What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, that was the email sent to me, actually. And if you're a parent in the UK, you get these mails come through once, twice a week, various things about school clubs and homework and stuff. And this came through, and I looked at it, and I thought, okay, that sounds interesting. They want us to go and have a little drop-in to see the nurse. And when I looked at it, I opened the letter up, and it said, it said provide on top. And I thought, okay, there's a nice sort of interesting little word there. And then it went on and said, are you worried about your kids? And if they've got any problems, come and see the school nurse team. Now, the school nurse team is in capitals, as you can see.
Right, so we have this slide here, Graham, and this is what you received.
Absolutely. This is the kind of letter when you open up the mail. And it says, come and drop in. There's a drop-in session. It's all lovely. If you've got weight problems with your kid, or they don't sleep, or or whatever else, just pop in. Anything. You don't need an appointment. And I thought, that looks interesting. And it's all sent under the guise of it's the NHS. It's officialdom. It's all done through the schools. And if you look at the bottom, there's a little thing at the bottom. It says NHS, local authority, community services. So to anyone who's not looking at this is the NHS. And it's very difficult, impossible to see the small writing. And I had to blow it up something like 250% just to see it. And when you do blow it up, you see who is actually providing the services. And the people providing the provide, as it were, it's a private company. And I know if you've got the slide there with, I sent you on their website. But they quote themselves, we provide services across Essex and Waltham Forest and Redbridge and Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. It's a huge, huge, huge company. And they earn approximately 54 million a year. And they employ a load of people. And they serve communities with a total population of more than 1.9 million people. So now, there's nothing wrong with private companies providing services. What is wrong from my point of view, is that it's hidden as being the NHS, almost masquerading as the NHS. And the problem that I've got, and we discussed earlier, is that this is happening more and more with the NHS. More private services have been brought in, kind of under the umbrella, as it were. So you think you're getting an NHS service, and you're not getting an NHS service, you're getting a private service. And then my concern is, and I mentioned this earlier to you, Mike, is what happens down the line when they decide to flip the switch and start charging for these things to you. And then you turn around and look around, and suddenly your NHS is almost completely gone. And I just take issue of them not being clear that this isn't the NHS, this is a private for-profit service.
Right, okay, so I just wanted to highlight this then from NHS Choices, because I think you sent me this. This describes Provide, and it explains that Provide is a community interest company. So I went and had a look at community interest companies and came up with the annual report from the regulator of community interest companies. And I found this a fascinating page from that report, because it says, using the community interest company to transform essential services, the evolutionary way forward. So this is the annual report for the regulator. And to paraphrase this in my own words, this is my view of what I'm reading here. This looks to me like what they're doing is an interim step where they're permitting people that perhaps have worked in the NHS in the past to set up community interest companies which are sold to us as being for the benefit of the community, but which are profit-making, so they're not charities. At some point, well, what we're saying is that there's, I think in this report it said that there are 12,000 community interest companies in the country, and that last year about 10% of those failed, right? So at the moment we have an NHS which is failing in many, many ways, but particularly financially. And then we move services into community interest companies, which are supposed to make a profit, which is therefore the benefit of the community. But let's say it doesn't make a profit. Let's say it makes a small loss year on year. That's not viable. What happens at that point? It then gets sold to what, Virgin or some other large medical provider?
Yeah, and this is my concern. And I was speaking to my sister-in-law, actually, who works in the NHS, and she said, "Oh well, I hope she won't mind me saying, she said, well, they put this out for bidding and the NHS can't compete and you get a better service possibly and blah, blah, blah. And the reality is, if you step back, as with all of these things, you have to step back and you have to see the overreaching trend. And the overreaching trend appears to be that the NHS is being run down. And obviously that's an obvious thing to say, but within the scope of this, it's being run down, and it's being run down so that people will want to opt for private medical care once it's offered, and whichever package or however that's going to be. And it's all, as you're correct in saying, and well done for finding that, it's evolutionary. It's a transitionary stage between where we are and our mind thinking and where whoever's in charge of this wants us to be. And it's pretty obvious that more and more services are getting doled out to private companies. And the irony of it is that allegedly we can't afford to put enough nurses, employ them contractually to do their job. So what do they do in the hospitals? They then bring private companies in where nurses are getting paid more money. They're getting paid 4 or 5 times. Now, I'm not against nurses being paid more or doctors being paid more. That's not the point of this. But the point is you're just bringing in services which are costing more anyway. And you see this throughout the NHS. And so, it's a nonsense. And you've either got, or you've got the other side of it, which is where this may head, where it becomes so cutthroat that you end up having poorly paid people and getting poorly qualified people. So you've got two extremes. When in the middle, we've got the solution anyway, which we've had for many years, which is just fund properly, run properly, and keep the privatisation out of the NHS. And let's just have a good, proper working NHS that we grew up with, and hopefully our children can as well.
Graham, many interesting points there. I'd just like to say that a couple of days ago I was pointed at a newspaper article. This was one of the local Plymouth MPs called Gary Streeter. He was speaking at a local, he'd written an article for one of the local newspapers. He was attacking conspiracy theorists. And he was attacking the conspiracy of people that thought that there was a secret plan to privatise the NHS. Well, we have been seeing for many years, of course, the blatant move towards privatising the NHS. And I think what we're looking at here is another facet of that, which is privatisation by stealth. And yet at the same time, we have a Conservative MP who is claiming, no, this is all nonsense. I think these people are getting very frightened. Their plans are becoming clearer by the day. Emperor with no clothes. We can see what's happening. I'll try and bring that article in tomorrow, so we've got it fresh against what we're discussing today.
Okay. Now, Graham, was it AV5 you were speaking about? What was this? This was the. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it was AV5, and I think it was one of the first times I actually spoke at those conferences. And I mean, I don't know how much of the clip you're going to play. Are you going to play that clip?
No, we're not going to have time to do that today.
Okay. Well, effectively, I told a story just before I got into the talk, and what I said was I was in Bishop Stortford, and I was in a bookstore, and the kids were off in the kids section, and I was just browsing the health section, and just to be sure, I saw a book on once again a global threat, and it was to do with the fact that antibiotics are running out, and at that time, no one was really apart from me, no one was really speaking about it, and I was being interviewed on various programs about it, so I was quite shocked. And when I read it, I was even more shocked that it was our own chief medical officer that wrote the book. And there was a section in there that I'd sent you that I'd actually quoted, and people can see it online. And she tells a story, and in that story, she tells of how a woman becomes infected, and then she embellishes the story with how in the future there would be isolation camps. So if you were found to look infected on the streets, you would be arrested and taken to an isolation camp, which effectively were death camps. Now, I'm kind of paraphrasing what she said. Now,
but just to make the point once again, this was not a work of science fiction by some pulp fiction science fiction writer. This was a senior medical professional working for the government.
Absolutely, and that's why I found it so astonishing, because she couldn't do that without being sanctioned. And you hear me say that. There's no way, how can you put that out? And she was predicting a time when if you looked infected, you would be arrested, taken to an isolation camp, and effectively they would be known as death camps because you'd be put in places with other people that are infectious. And the whole point of this was, she was making the point that antibiotics are running out and we need to conserve them and we need to bring in new measures to help with infection. So we put a conference on rebutting that and saying, well, there's plenty of cures within and in treatments within natural health. You don't need to necessarily, start arresting people on the street for crying out loud. Anyway, so long story short, we've now moved forward to within the last. Well, I think I saw this document that hopefully you've got up now. Within the last, month. I think I saw it only a month ago or something, and then it's. Finally, I can't actually see the screen, just to let you know, so I can't read what's on the screen.
Right. Okay. So I'll just go through this, Graham. I'll go through this, Graham. So what we have on here is from the Federal Register in the United States, and this is about the control of communicable diseases. And the quote here is that posing a public health threat to the traveling public, be restricted from boarding commercial aircraft arriving into, departing from, or traveling within the United States. And you highlighted this article on EON. Which is entitled National CDC, the U.S. proposal on apprehend and involuntary quarantine if you're traveling and you've got... so let's just quote a little bit from this. It says, a notice of proposed rulemaking, control of communicable diseases was published by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control on August the 15th, 2016, that will amend federal public health law to allow health officials to take into custody and involuntarily quarantine travelers who have symptoms of or have been exposed to someone with symptoms common to measles, chickenpox, and a wide range of other communicable diseases. Now, this is very interesting because we're not talking Zika virus here, Graham. We're talking measles.
Yeah, and if you step back, as always, I'm going to bore you saying the same thing. You just step back and look at how this is all going together, how the push for vaccination, certainly in the States, mandatory vaccination, certainly now in Australia, it's starting to come in with clauses attached, qualification attached. Here, the big push within the surgeries, they're bringing the vaccinations into the schools, and I know that you and I are going to do something separate on that at some point, Mike, on the flu vax, hopefully sooner rather than later. When you see all of this, you start to realise what's going on. But the menacing thing about this is what they're doing is the whole point of this document, this proposal, is to deal with threats, biological threats. Once again, you're kind of equating it to it's like a terrorism thing. Now, if you take the mainstream view, that would appear to be reasonable. You want to make sure that you're protected against biological attack. But what they've done is, and what they're doing across the board, is they're conflating that with things which aren't anything to do with terrorism. And then under that umbrella, you then become controlled, and therefore, and your rights, your human and quite frankly common sense rights, go out of the window, because people may or may not be aware. But what you just said was, Mike, is that if this goes through and you get on a plane and you look ill, the staff on that plane are going to be, by law, are going to have to inform customs or the appropriate authorities, so that when you land, you will be taken. You will be put in a place which effectively is like a quarantine, and you will be examined against your will. And they will decide what intervention may or may not be required. That may be a vaccination, that may be some other form of medical treatment, it may involve you being detained for many days, and on and on and on. And the point that struck me, and the point that I brought it up to you today, is because if you listen to that talk, what our chief medical officer was saying, in a sense, is now being started to be played out. And, I don't know whether it's art imitating life or life imitating art, but it's incredibly menacing that is now a proposition on the table and will become law within the United States. And you can bet your bottom dollar, as all these things, they start there and they end up here.
Right, well, let's just give another quote from this article then. It says here, this is a clear case of federal government overreach, said Barbara Lowe Fisher, NVIC co-founder and president. Measles is not Ebola, chickenpox is not smallpox. US health officials should not be expanding police power to take people into custody and place them in involuntary quarantine whenever they believe someone is sick or could become sick with illnesses that are far less serious than hemorrhagic fever and the plague.
It's all to do with the wording. They only have to reasonably have a suspicion that you're ill. Now, I looked through the definitions of what they describe as ill. And if you've ever been on a plane or a long-haul plane, pretty much everybody fulfills the criteria. I mean, you all snivel and cough when you get off because of being stuck in that plane for God knows how long. They say, well, it'd be good to get someone's temperature to see if it's a high temperature because that would define them as being ill. But even if you can't get that, don't worry. As long as they feel warm. So if someone feels warm or looks a bit pasty in the face, so that's most of the phobics, the people who are afraid of flying. And on and on. If you've got a rash, if you've got eczema, and you go on a plane and the eczema is raised on your hand, your arm, or on your face, and a stewardess sees that, according to the wide reaching of these criteria, you should be targeted to be put into quarantine once you arrive at the other end. Now, people may say, well, they wouldn't do that. Don't be silly. Well, you've only got to look back to I think it was 2000 Terrorism Act when they brought in Section 44 powers. And there's thousands of people arrested under that act. There was a girl walking down a cycle lane, and she was actually arrested because she didn't have a bike, believe it or not. There was an autistic 12-year-old arrested by UK police, boy, on a train. And they all brought into these acts, these powers, which had no real relevance or real bearing to what was going on in reality. And the point is, once you give people these powers, they will use them. And if you imagine how many people are going to be crammed into these quarantine places, can you imagine how many people getting off a flight who are suspicious that people are suspicious may be ill? I mean, it's a recipe for disaster. It's absolute and utter nonsense.
Right. Well, the article quotes the CDC here as saying the ongoing persistence of measles in the United States provides a good example of the need for this NPRM. Every case of measles in the United States is considered a public health emergency because of extremely high transmissibility. And then they go on to say that administration of MMR vaccine is part of the post-exposure treatment. So at the end of the day, this is all about vaccination.
Absolutely. And it's a nonsense because this doesn't make medical sense. Because if you've got the infection, to then vaccinate after you've got the infection, I'm sorry, you're going to need to spend a long time trying to convince me that that's worthwhile. There are other interventions, and I can understand that. But once you've got the disease, once you've got the alleged infection, there's very little point in them vaccinating you. So that's a nonsense straight away. And you're absolutely right. What they've done is they've effectively said they can haul in anybody and just give them any medical intervention they see fit. And things like measles and I mean, once again, as I stated at the onset of this, is they're conflating this now. So you've got simple stuff that really isn't a biological threat to the health of the nation. It's simply not the case. It's not a terrorist thing, and you aren't all going to be devastated through it. And they're conflating this thing. So now it's all wrapped in this law, and you're going to get a policeman or somebody in authority who's now going to come in and act in those powers and in the presence of that feeling that you are a threat. And this is ridiculous. I mean, this is Orwellian on acid, Orwell on acid. This is just complete and utter nonsense. And, you've only got to go back to the 60s and before. I mean, there's a whole discussion you can have about vaccines, whether they work, whether they don't work, the criminality involved with companies, how much they're fined every year, the autism, the whole 9 yards. You can do all that. That's a whole other show. That's about 20 other shows. But just looking at this in just simple common sense, in a common sense way, this doesn't make any sense. But the problem is once this gets into law, that doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
Officials will act. You will be hauled away, and I mean it's absolutely affected my view. I've got family in the States, so I'm now thinking, wow, do I really want to get on a plane anymore if this goes through to go to America?
Graham, it doesn't make sense unless you say it's a malevolent agenda, that this policy is being put together because it has got an unpleasant end result. Then everything starts to make sense. And you're talking about medical treatment, enforced medical treatment like vaccination. But of course, what we've got happening in UK at the moment is the terminating of particularly elderly people in so-called care environments. And one of the key parts of that is that food and drink are now deemed to be medical treatment. So if there's a decision that medical treatment can be withheld, that means they can be starved and dehydrated to death. And I'm going to say in the next week or so, we'll have a fascinating interview, which is entitled Mechanics of Modern Murder, which is going to be talking about that very process of simply wiping out particularly elderly people by this very sinister type of policy. So it doesn't make sense, it's nonsense. Well, that's the initial look, but if you look deeper, it makes absolute sense because we've got a very vicious regime installing itself.
Right.
Yeah. Quickly, yeah, I think, and many people don't want to go down this route because it is a bit awful. We want a nice life, we want to have our kids, go to work, get a good job, blah blah blah. We don't really want to be interested in this stuff. But the point is now, this is like a tsunami coming at you. It's coming at you, or just keep it simple. It's something that is lapping at your feet now. And if you don't watch out, it will be a tsunami. So you have to get up, you have to get informed, and you have to now inform others and ensure that good common sense prevails and not this, which appears to be Naziesque regulations and laws are coming in. And we need laws that reflect humanity, not laws that reflect whatever you want to call this. I mean, quite frankly, it's pseudo-fascist. If you know, not that I like using those terms.
Okay, thank you for that, and I totally agree. And I think it is fascistic is the right definition, because we need to bring in the big society communitarianism, and we've got the beast pinned down. What do we do about it? Well, tomorrow night in Glastonbury, we've got a follow-on meeting. What is it to do with? Asserting the rule of law. We are recognising that law has broken down in UK. We have got a fascistic type government in place. How are we going to deal with this? We need to reassert the rule of law. So if you didn't make the first Glastonbury meeting, this is a follow-up, and that's in the town hall tomorrow evening.
Okay, good news, Brian.
Good. We always like that, Mike.
Yes, because we know that the Bank of England operates in society's best interests, and they want to tell us all about it. And we mentioned a few days ago, last week, that the Future Forum, the Bank of England's Future Forum 2016, is taking place next month. Well, they have followed that straight up with a new website called the Knowledge Bank. Here it is. This is a Bank of England website. And what's this all about? Well, here's what they have to say. What we do at the Bank of England affects everyone. However, our polling revealed that only 1 in 4 people think that the bank is good at explaining its actions and decisions in terms they can understand. So this is the economy made simple. They want to change this perception. So the bank has set up its first ever public light bulb icon understanding team. I think that's a misprint there, with the sole objective to improve understanding about what they do, and most importantly, how what they do affects our day-to-day lives. So the Knowledge Bank, there you go.
Well, I'm feeling better already, because clearly these are the people we should be trusting. They've got our best interests at heart, and they're kind, moral, upstanding people who are going to produce a better world.
Absolutely. Now, we've been pointing out that the House of Lords is under threat, and we've been suggesting reasons why that's not such a great thing. They've decided to take action to try to prevent any more draconian changes to that institution. So they're going to throw out 200 of the 820 odd peers that there are in the House of Lords. This is a cross-party group of peers, according to The Sun, who have agreed that that the House of Lords is too big. They need to get rid of some of them. They're proposing that once they've reduced their numbers, that if more life peers are created, that they will not be allowed to sit in the House until a place becomes available for them. They're basically hoping that this will be enough to prevent any further sort of degradation of the rule of law and the Constitution, and removal of them as an institution. The danger, I think, in this is to make sure that they do not choose the crossbenchers. So there are 255 Tory peers in the House of Lords, 209 Labour peers, 105 Lib Dems, and 177 who are independent of all party politics. So it would be nice to see some of the lesser members of the Tory, Labour and Lib Dem parties being removed rather than some of the independents.
But nevertheless, this is constitutional reform.
It is, of course, yes. Graham, this one's for you, really. I saw this article in the Mail today, and I think it was yesterday, sorry, and it says patient with rare, sorry, Theo, if we can put that up, patient with rare heart condition dies after asking doctors to turn off her pacemaker in the UK's, quote, first assisted dying case. And when I looked at the circumstances of this, the person had a pacemaker, they asked for it to be switched off, but many of the comments at the end of the article were really suggesting that, of course, this is inflammatory language by the Mail because it's not the first assisted dying case, because as Brian's just mentioned, withdrawal of food and water is done on a regular basis on the basis of removing medical intervention. So the question is, from an medical ethical point of view, I thought you'd be a good person to ask, is this what you would consider assisted dying, or is this not quite that far, but an intervention that is equivalent to removing other types of medical treatment?
Well, I mean, if you think standard geopolitics is a problem, then open up this can of worms. I mean, this is a nightmare of an area, because obviously there are people that are suffering incredibly, and all witnessing that, thinking that there's nothing they could do, and they wanted to help that person, family included, would probably want, if possible, to allow their loved one to pass peace. So at one extreme example, you've got justification for assisting someone to pass. Now, then you've got the definition of how you do that. If starving someone to death is helping them, then I can't see how that's helping them, because obviously you're giving them a way of dying which isn't very pleasant. So then you get the thing, well, what do you do and how do you assist that? And do you use drugs? And obviously then if you've only got to look at the lifers and the people in Texas and other places who have lethal injection, you've only got to see how that all goes wrong. And there's some horrific stories from there. So even if you could find at the extreme justification for this, how you go about it and how you safely go about it and how you do it in a way that would not further harm the person in terms of making them experience something awful before they pass. That's that is obviously there isn't necessarily a clear answer to that. So that has to be solved, before you can even consider that. However, it does go on, and there's no doubt about it. And I think if people I'm not going to necessarily quote anything from the NHS. I don't work in the NHS. I'm not an allopathic doctor. But I'm aware of stories that people say old people in old homes, whether or not people would deem that certain drugs may have been pushed a bit harder than others. I'm sure if you speak to many medical physicians, they've got a few skeletons in the cupboard, and in their view, things may have been done, and they may have felt that they were assisting that patient. I have no direct evidence of that, so that's not a direct quote, as it were. So it must go on, and I think it was called the Liverpool Care Pathway. Actually, I think I could be wrong on that, where they did literally withdraw food and water. And really, you've only got to go into any geriatric ward, and if you've got a loved one in there, there's always one or two people just lying there, not eating and drinking, and the staff might have try for 5 minutes to give them food, then they give up, and then so in a sense you've got it there anyway. It just may not be officially kind of recognised. They did studies. They've done studies in Holland and other places, and there's many issues against this on the other side. And I think they did a study, and over 1,000 of the people that were assisted did not give permission. They couldn't give permission, and only 400 did. Then you get the thing of many disabled people would want to take their life, but not necessarily because they're disabled, but because they don't have the services and the provisions that should be given to them, and they become frustrated and depressed. And then again, are medical people the best people to make that decision? Just because they're good at medicine doesn't mean they're good at ethics and law, and so and on and on and on and on and on. And there are many arguments against it, and I can see the reasons for it as well. I think it's an impossible situation. I really do. I think it's incredibly difficult. Whoever's got to make the decision about this, good luck to them, because it is an absolute can of worms.
Okay, well, I think we'll be having more on that subject coming out, as I say, over the next couple of weeks.
I think we should leave it there.
Yes, I think we're just about the end of the news. Graham, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to have you as always. Just a reminder again, if you can possibly get to that Glastonbury meeting, please do. We're now starting to ramp up towards the British Constitution Group meeting on the 19th of November in Winchester. That will also be looking very much at the breakdown of law in the United Kingdom and what we do to reassert the rule of law. And as we can see by today's news, it's probably getting ever more urgent.
And don't forget, on Wednesday, if you're in Scotland, we're meeting on Wednesday night for the first sort of Friends of the UK column meeting up there.
In Dunblane. We'll put an ad out again for that tomorrow. That's it. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.